many indivisible groups in Illinois and across the country. Welcome to Climate Realities. Can you hear okay? Okay, Climate Realities, Science, Action, and Policy. It's one of a series of forums that has been organized by Indivisible Illinois 9 about issues that are vital to all of us. We've had public events like this one in the last few months on immigration, reproductive rights, and believe it or not, on impeachment. We organize them to educate ourselves about the issues, to educate the public, and to promote and advance the core mission of Indivisible, which is to build a more just, equitable, secure, and democratic country. The immediate goals for 2020, of course, are ending the Trump presidency and building... That's an easy applause line, I think. And building strong progressive majorities in both houses of Congress. Just a bit about Indivisible, because not everybody here knows us that well. After the 2016 election, a small group of congressional aides wrote a guide for folks about what to do and how to get organized and prepared. It was designed to inform the enormous numbers of people around the country who were alarmed by what had happened and didn't want it to happen again. Many of them had never done anything political before in their lives. Lenny Mana Hoppenworth, who started our group, Lenny, why don't you wave to folks, was one of those. There are now more than 6,000 indivisible groups around the country. We're just one of them. And we're all working. We contributed to flipping the House last year and many other victories. We're already organizing people to canvass in Wisconsin. We canvassed for Sean Casten and Lauren Underwood and helped flip those seats in the midterms. We want to encourage you to join us in the work that lies ahead. One more note. This event is being live streamed, so behave yourselves. This has already been an historic day. Sondland's testimony earlier at the impeachment inquiry takes us a long step closer to a solid rock case against the president. Important as impeachment is, it's not the whole ball of wax, though. There are dozens of pressing issues that require urgent attention, and none are more urgent than climate change. So it's gratifying to see so many people coming out for this event in the middle of the week who, like me, are probably legitimately scared of the trajectory that we're on, and because you want to do something that'll make a difference. I'll introduce our panel in just a moment. First, just a bit of housekeeping. It's a hard room to see in because everything is flat. So get ready to move your heads. But I think it'll work out, okay? Questions. As the evening goes on, I'm sure the folks on the panel will say things that you'll want to know more about or you'll disagree with. We've got people who will have Post-it notes, and just raise your hand and somebody with a Post-it note will come to you. You can hand in the Post-it note and we'll try to get to as many questions and comments as we can before the evening's over. At the end of the evening, there's a little restaurant bar across the street called Gideon Wells. They are having a debate watch event there. The whole dining room is reserved with TVs if you if you just can't get enough of this juicy stuff, you can drink while you do it too, and have a bite to eat. Okay, for the next 45, 50 minutes, maybe a little more, our panel will have a conversation about the science, the politics, and the strategies that we need to fight climate change. They are uniquely qualified. Ann Evans, at the far end, is the CEO of Elevate Energy, which is a remarkable not-for-profit consulting firm that works with homeowners, landlords, businesses, and even utility companies on energy conservation. a fundamental requirement if we're going to get serious about climate change. Dejah Powell, next to her, is a graduate of Cornell University where she studied environmental science. She grew up on the South Side, and that's where she's currently working for Sunrise Movement, the youth-led organization that's taken the lead in pushing hard for a serious commitment on the scale of the problem. We have all heard some about the Green New Deal. I'm sure some of you came here because you want to know more. Damon Drummer is the executive director of New Consensus, what the New Yorker, I thought, kind of interestingly referred to as an upstart policy shop. We need more of those. With a habit of looking at problems systemically and with a racial and economic justice lens. When it turned its attention to climate change, it became deeply involved in the development of the Green New Deal as a strategy of attack, and no one can speak on it with more authority than Damon. Isaac Larkin is a doctoral graduate student at Northwestern in synthetic biology, and he became something of a national figure not long ago when he confronted Joe Biden on national television about accepting financial support from the fossil fuel industry. You guys can go home and I worried about your draw. That's pretty good. He's a triple threat. He knows the science, he knows the politics, and he also sings and writes songs. We're down the street from Old Town School. We're going to end the evening with a song that Isaac's written about climate change and the movement to feed it. At the end, stick around, we're going to hand out song sheets, and everybody, I want to insist, everybody should raise their voice and sing along with Isaac. Okay. Let's now let the speakers talk among themselves for a while. Like I said, if you've got a question, raise your hand. You'll get a Post-it note, and we'll get to it later. Here you go.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm sure that you all are as excited as I am to get to hear from this amazing group of brilliant and audacious leaders. So I'll get right to it. I just wanted to add a couple of things to what you said, Nick, about our work at Elevate Energy. In addition to helping people reduce their operating costs, preserving affordable housing, reducing greenhouse gas emissions through energy conservation, we are expanded. We're very focused on clean energy and clean water broadly. And in addition to benefits going to saving dollars, probably even more important is that we are bringing diverse businesses into the clean energy economy, so that folks that are doing the energy conservation work, installing the solar panels, come from the communities that need them most. So that's an additional focus of ours. So folks, to get us grounded, I thought we should talk a little bit about the science of climate change, and I know both Dejah and Isaac wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, so basically it's been known since like the turn of last century that certain molecules in the atmosphere trap heat, and that's an important part of just the biosphere generally. And in the middle of the 20th century, the 40s, 50s, and the 60s, scientists started to observe that the planet was ever so slowly warming, and that the concentration of carbon dioxide was increasing. And in particular, in addition to a few scientists at different universities, there were scientists at Exxon and Shell, in particular James Black at Exxon, who made these observations and were able to demonstrate that the cause of this observed trend in global warming was human-released emissions of carbon dioxide caused by the burning of fossil fuels. He gave presentations to Exxon executives to that effect back in 1977.
So brave. Dejah, do you want to add to what's happening with the fossil fuel industry? Are we making any progress, or is fossil fuel consumption going down?
Yeah, I can just add. Also, a little bit of more context. Like I think we talk about fossil fuels and we talk about carbon dioxide a lot, but there are also other sort of gases that are emitted in the atmosphere and that also contribute to warming. And so you think about things like methane, for example, which released by cows, released from our agricultural system. Also, there's tons of methane sort of frozen in permafrost in the Arctic, and there's this sort of positive feedback loop of that permafrost melting and then releasing more methane in the atmosphere. And I think methane is also like 28 to 34 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so thinking about all of these different ways, not only from like carbon dioxide, but how sort of these chemicals that contribute to sort of warming the environment and planet.
I know you also have a perspective on who's most at risk as climate change happens. It's happening now, right?
Yeah, and I know, so some of the sort of effects that we see of climate change are increasing temperature, so places get hotter, and also increasing precipitation, so there's more rain, more flooding, more intense flooding. We see things like more hurricanes, all across the places that hurricanes happen and occur. And when you think about those increasing sort of climate disasters, there's this sort of element of resiliency and who is able to respond and who is able to move and who is able to adapt. And so when you think about climate change and you think about the people who are impacted the most, it's the people that can't sort of adapt and that aren't as resilient. I like to think about, I love the book This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein, like awesome analysis of like why climate change exists. And she talked about Hurricane Katrina, and being a young girl, I remember the stories of Hurricane Katrina, but I never understood the intersection between sort of, social justice and also like environmental justice, and thinking about the majority of the people who were impacted were like Black folks in New Orleans, and like they didn't have the social infrastructure to like support and help those people. And so I think this is probably getting a little off topic, but when I think about like why I'm fighting so much for climate change, it's like thinking like there's this inequity and these disparities that exist in the world today. And I think, as we have a changing world and a changing climate, like there are people that are not gonna be like protected. And so I'm like organizing and doing all that I can to make sure that like the South Side of Chicago is like as resilient as it can be for people's like safety, health, well-being, jobs, like our physical environment. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your leadership on that. Demond, I know you want to jump in on this topic, and in particular, tell us what kind of prospects do you see for actually slowing or reversing the momentum of climate change?
Yeah, and just to like spoiler alert, we know how to do a lot of what we need to do. We have like 90% of the technology right now. We have the technology that we need right now to like move to 90% of our energy power generation, be renewables. Like, it's just a matter of will, I have very boring answers because it's just, that's why we get quoted in the media. But anyway, but it's interesting. I was listening to the former CEO of BP wrote a book that's kind of interesting. He thinks we can decarbonize fossil fuels themselves. It's really weird.
How convenient.
Yeah, how convenient. But he said that the American Petroleum Institute received a briefing in 1959.
Oh yeah, the entire industry is implicated in this. So the American Petroleum Institute is like the industry and lobbying organization for the entire oil industry. There's also like the national mining industry, there's one for natural gas, and the campaign of deliberate lying to the public about the uncertainty around the science was coordinated through those lobbying industries. So the entire industries are implicated in this.
So 1959, one of the scientists for the Manhattan Project was like, hey, this is like bad. And then the rest is history, right? So, it's just a matter of will, right? And so I think what Dejah mentioned about connecting and kind of elevating how the climate crisis intersects with the economic crisis, which intersects with like the political crisis in the country, which intersects with how we marginalize certain groups. Threading those needles, connecting those dots is how we're going to win.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just add, the way that I think about this that gets me really fired up is this is something that Naomi Klein talks about and David Wallace Wells talks about. The people who did the least to cause this problem, both within the United States and globally, are the ones who are going to suffer worst and first. It's going to come for everyone, but it's going to hit them first. And so climate is a justice issue.
Great, fantastic. So now what are we going to do about it? We've heard, you all are wearing t-shirts even, so we've heard about this thing called the Green New Deal. Dejah, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll start off, and I'll just correct one thing that Nick said about my organization. I am not the person that in this room that can speak most authoritatively about the Green New Deal. No, like very seriously, at New Consensus, we were boggled by this. The press wants like one organization, and that's the press. And even some foundations, we're like, no, that's kind of ridiculous. That's what the government is for, right? Like we have to take control of the state and like figure out how we're going to get this done together. We've always believed that we, the people, will give ourselves a Green New Deal, right? That local communities, states, localities, neighborhoods, and the federal government, we have to work together to get that done. So we have to bring all of our vision, and so we cannot let anybody in any room think that they have a monopoly on the Green New Deal, right? So give yourself a hand for that, because we need to take ownership of that. I've had people come up to me at conferences saying, "How do we get in?" It's like, why are you asking me? Like, publish what you know we need to do, right? So anyway, let me just calm down a bit. So yeah, I mean, it's just. But at New Consensus, we are in an interesting position because of our connection to the Sunrise Movement. We are a think tank that emerged out of the movement that recruited Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to even run for Congress. The reason why I'm working on New Consensus is because I was drafted, they were trying to draft me to run in Illinois 1, and I didn't say no. Because when I was flattered, I thought they had incredible judgment. And I was also very skeptical, but I took a trip to Kentucky and met with 5 people that they wanted to recruit to be their 5 banner candidates for Congress. And this is like 2016, 2017. This is early 2017. And in that room was AOC, Cori Bush out of Missouri, and a few others, and me. And you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that she decided to run in that meeting. I didn't say it to anybody, but I decided not to run in that meeting. But one thing I became very committed to, and one thing that became very clear to me was that the ideas that we were discussing, the vision that we all shared, deserved a significant amount of attention. And I wanted to focus on those ideas and really hone our ability to talk about that. Like, at the time I was organizing in Inglewood, and it's like, I need to be able to knock on a door in Inglewood and be able to like communicate this vision to people who are busy and trying to get through like life, right? And so that was the genesis of New Consensus, right? How do we work on these big, bold ideas and show how practical it is and how unprecedented these types of interventions and the scale and scope of that mission is. And one last thing, you know, it's called the Green New Deal, but I think it's important that we pause and understand and problematize the New Deal, right? There's this amazing book that Ira Katznelson wrote. Ira Katznelson, Fear Itself. Has anybody read it? Fear Itself? Go pick it up. I don't have royalties on it, but go pick it up. Fear Itself. Of the many things that he's doing, he says, you know, what more could be said about the New Deal? The most painted of all American landscapes, right? He says, one, that we underappreciate the role that Congress had in crafting the New Deal. We see it as FDR's project, but it was in fact a congressional project. And because it was a congressional project, even though the Democrats had the majority control in the House, segregationist Southern Democrats had like a veto caucus within that majority. So everything that came out for the New Deal was crafted in the image of Jim Crow segregationist white supremacists. And what they were able to do was nationalize the Jim Crow model. That's how we get redlining in the hood in Chicago, right? And there was this trope that said, or this saying that says, the further south you went, the less you saw the impact of the New Deal. That's how you explain Mississippi and Alabama being at the bottom of every national ranking, right? Deep South Jim Crow politics, that's what it gets you. And the further north you went, the more you saw the effects and nationalization of the Jim Crow model. That's what the New Deal did, among many other things, right? But the New Deal did that. And so that's why it's fundamental that we be just as targeted to women and Latinos, right? And black people as the New Deal was. Right? I was talking to Derek Hamilton. He was saying, you know, you need to have a race and gender conscious Green New Deal. And I forget her name. She teaches at, formerly at UMass Amherst, Black Woman Economist. She said, well, the New Deal was very race and gender conscious, right? Like very race and gender conscious, right? So we just need to do that in the other direction. So can we be as bold and clear about our motives and objectives, and be as clear in our purpose as the segregationists Southern Democrats were? Right? So that's the animating spirit of the Green New Deal. Not that, but that we can target certain groups and put them first because they have been hurt the most by design, right? And really acknowledge the role that our government plays in shaping our economy and shaping our society, right? And so we can talk more about that later, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah.
I just want to note really quickly that one of the great things about the Green New Deal is how people can come to it from different motivations and all be brought in and unified by the single vision. So Damon just talked about how you can come to the Green New Deal from a justice perspective. I came to the Green New Deal from like the science perspective. I was reading about the IPCC report that was released at the end of 2018 that basically said the place that we're at with climate change is we're on track for catastrophic disaster, like world civilization threatening disaster on the current trajectory. And in order to get off that trajectory, we need to cut global carbon emissions in half by 2030, and we need to get to net zero by 2050, and then we need to pull carbon out of the atmosphere for the rest of the century. And doing all of that will require World War II scale mobilization of every economy on Earth. And basically, the science is saying we need massive government-led action now. And so I came to it from that. And then the great thing about the Green New Deal is that it doesn't treat climate as its own separate thing, which is what it's been treated as in the past. It instead says, okay, so science requires this mass mobilization. We will use this mass mobilization to simultaneously address the crises of political and economic inequality and the crises of historical and ongoing marginalization and oppression in this country and around the world. And we will use this scientifically required mobilization to build a better world and leave no one behind. And like that vision, I mean, I was not a political activist before, and now I am because of that vision.
Fantastic, let's do that thing. Dejah, I know you're out advocating for the Green New Deal and educating folks. What kind of questions are you hearing? What kind of...
Yeah, I think when I talk about the Green New Deal with people at work, like my friends, there's this sort of like, that's impossible. Like, do you understand like the resources needed, the political system, and like the environment needed to actually push something like this through? And I think it goes back to that point of like, the Earth is like 4.7 billion years ago, or 4.7 billion years old. And we humans have existed for a very small fraction of time, like on this planet, and have completely like been horrible stewards to the planet. And so it's like our responsibility to like fix this issue. And so when you think about that mobilization effort for World War II, we like did the impossible. And so it's like trying to come at this issue with the mindset that like the ingenuity in humans, like we could do anything. And I also think, when I talk to people about a lot of issues, because there are a ton of issues in Chicago to fix, there's this sort of helplessness and hopelessness of, you know, the system has always been the way that it is, nothing's gonna change, like why keep trying? And I think when you think about the energy organizing with young people in Sunrise I was in Detroit for the DSC debate in the summer, like sleeping on church floors and learning about like Sunrise DNA and like the New Deal alignment and the Reagan alignment and like the alignment that we need to push forward a Green New Deal. Like that is the sort of inspiring stuff where like we need to do this on scale to like bring about the ecosystem where something like a Green New Deal could happen. And so I think it's pushing that vision of like, this is a crisis and this is the world that we can live in, and like all of the things that we value are reflected in this Green New Deal. So like what's the hesitation for like jumping in and getting involved?
And, you know, and just to kind of add some detail to this idea of the World War II mobilization, which was, as Dejah mentioned, an impossible, like there were impossible goals that were achieved and exceeded. You know, what I love about the warplane story from the World War II scenario is that it was like a Midwestern ingenuity story, right? Although it was Detroit. So, you know, it was like 1941 or so. FDR says we need 189,000 warplanes, right, to wage conflict abroad successfully. At the time, the U.S. was building about 3,000 airplanes a year, 3,000. And FDR said he needed 189,000. And everybody was like, you're crazy, that's ridiculous, not gonna happen. So what did they do? He tapped some of the business leaders of the time from the auto industry who knew how to do mass production and connected them with people from who knew how to build airplanes. And they worked it out, right? They went from being artisanal products that one craftsman would make to something that you could do on an assembly line. And he did the same play with helmets and backpacks and guns, unfortunately, and bullets and all the stuff that we need, like tanks and jeeps, things that the US had not built before. So you went from a country that did not even have a military industrial capacity to one that was the global leader and still is today in military hardware, right? And that was all not because banks got up and saw the opportunity. That was because the US government wasn't just a final purchaser of the end products, it was the first investor in building the productive capacity. So all we're saying is that if we can use public dollars to build factories, to make machines of war, we can invest massive amounts of public resources and dollars to build the stuff that we need to clean our atmosphere, right? And have clean water, clean air, and better food. We can do that, and that's what this is all about. So that's why the World War II mobilization is a great example, because it shows that the public sector and public capital can mobilize productive capacity in our country to get the things that we need, that the economy will not deliver on because of natural market forces. So.
Great. So, I don't know what happened in that room when you decided you didn't want to run, but I should really.
No, I said I didn't tell anybody. I waited till I got home.
Okay. We should reconsider. So, given that the 45th President of the United States is unlikely to be making that call for action, as you mentioned, happened in our history, and we're unlikely to get that leadership from the Senate right now, what's the best way for us to move forward now?
Yeah,
I don't know. So
I can share a little bit about Sunrise's strategy of how we're thinking about approaching this. And so just a little bit of history on Sunrise's theory of change. We look at it through the people's alignment. So how do we bring this alignment of labor, social justice movement, big green, together and push forward a Green New Deal? There's also sort of the people power piece. So how do we mobilize as many people, young people together to bring attention to the climate crisis? And you see that through things like, sitting in Nancy Pelosi's office, or, calling out Dianne Feinstein. And there's also the political power piece. So how do we endorse candidates who will, AOC, champion the Green New Deal? And so on the building the people power piece, Sunrise has sort of a sequence of strikes that we're organizing and supporting in collaboration with other grassroots, youth climate groups. So there's one December 6th, you all should come and show up. December 6th strike, there's a September 20th strike, and there's these sequence of strikes that we're organizing so that eventually we can, hopefully mobilize to 3.5% of the population to say that we are mobilized, we are organized, and we want action and demand action on climate.
Just to make sure that everyone's got the same context, can one of you give a little, sort of simple, high-level description of what the Green New Deal is?
Isaac can probably do it. Dejah can probably do it.
Yeah.
But do y'all want to do it? I get tired of doing it.
I can add mine after.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll do what I like, and then y'all can fill in the stuff like that. So the Green New Deal is a World War II scale mobilization of all the resources of our economy, not just our capital, but our ingenuity, productive capacity, et cetera, to not only transition to a clean and kind of green economy, but do so in a way that leaves no community, no worker behind. It outlines a few national projects that we need to do to get that done. One project is upgrading every building, every school, library, home, right, in the country to the highest levels of energy efficiency, water quality, water use, including replacing every lead pipe lead, not just in Chicago, but all over. There are communities all across this country that are underreported that have poisoned water, and it's all about that lead pipe lead, which is on the homeowner side. Most municipalities don't have the money to, fix the leaded mains. Most homeowners don't have the money to fix that lead pipe. I have one in my house. I'm looking at it, gotta figure that out. And just a side note, our partners in labor say, our allies rather in labor say that just that pipes project is a full employment program for the building trades. We literally do not have enough people to even like make all of that happen fast enough, right? So this whole idea of the Green New Deal being a job killer is just a lie, right? That's just like one project that will keep a lot of construction workers occupied, to say nothing for those who know how to build pipelines. There are pipes we like, and those are the pipes that are in our communities that we want to be a lot more healthy. So upgrading every home and building, of course, achieving 100% clean, and I would argue renewable power generation. I know there's a little bit of debate there, but I don't see anything clean about nuclear, right? It just doesn't seem, you know. However, we know that they, will be, they're part of the transition, and so they will just not be renewed. You got to say all that stuff, right? But the point is, we will have renewable energy, 100%, and have a grid that reflects that new, the energy style of the new like renewable style of production. Again, we have grid infrastructure that is, and I'll stop here. We have grid infrastructure that is designed around fossil fuels. So this idea that when people tell you that solar and wind doesn't work, it's because we have a grid that doesn't work for them, right? So we have to have a whole new way of doing that. Decarbonizing transportation, industry, and just go down the list. I'll stop there. I know there's time.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the Green New Deal is a resolution, and like organizations like the New Consensus are working to fill out what the policy will look like, and there are presidential candidates who also have like their version and idea of a Green New Deal. But I think it's important to stress that like the Green New Deal is flexible and can be changed, and like communities have input and have say on like what that policy looks like, and that's why I think it's super important to like continue organizing and speaking to people and let them know that like you sort of are responsible and should be empowered to say like what you want a Green New Deal to look like in your community.
Yeah, one other thing I would add to that is the mic on? That I think of the Green New Deal as an opportunity to re-envision what a good world looks like, what a good community looks like, because we have to change. The way we're doing things is not going to be, we're not going to be doing those things this way in the future, one way or the other, so we might as well, we should make the change now to stave off catastrophe. And so that's an opportunity to say, what does a good work week look like? What does a good and climate resilient energy infrastructure look like? What does a good social safety net look like? And I'm really excited by that.
Great. So we've been talking federally. We're starting to get some questions about what is happening here in Illinois. Does anyone want to take that? I'm happy to. Should I give it a start? Okay, I'll give it a start. So I want to tell you about something which is called the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. You can look it up online. It's a broad coalition that really works across the state and has spent the last year doing over 100 community meetings called Listen, Lead, Share to really understand what the people of Illinois want in terms of clean energy policy. This coalition has come up with a piece of legislation that was introduced last session. Didn't make it through. It was a very busy session in Illinois, so a lot of good things did come through. And that is called the Clean Energy Jobs Act. That includes a lot of components similar to what's been discussed here already. It sets a goal of having a zero carbon electric grid by 2030. So the electric grid would be carbon free by that point in time. It sets a goal of being 100% renewable by 2050. So after we make the electricity grid carbon free, we still have the remaining issue of carbon in all other sectors of our economy, including transportation. Natural gas is typically used for heating and hot water, so that still remains an issue. So the Clean Energy Jobs Act looks to make the entire state 100% renewable by 2050, making big investments in electrification of our transit system with our transportation system with a big focus on transit. Equity runs throughout the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and there is a big emphasis on actually helping those communities who lose jobs in this transition. I don't think anybody's done that particularly well yet. There's a very comprehensive package in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, so that people in Illinois will be installing solar panels that are hopefully assembled here in Illinois, and there will be manufacturing jobs, and there will be installation jobs, and there will be construction jobs associated with making this huge transformation of our economy. So that is the Clean Energy Jobs Act.
I guess a follow-up question of what are the sort of chances of that passing at the state level?
I don't know. I can tell you it's a very broad coalition, and I think there's a lot of interest in moving a piece of energy legislation forward, but it's going to be difficult.
I'm going to follow Dejah's lead and ask a question. How does the prospects of like this proposal look with our utility kind of out the picture now, and what kind of opportunities open up with ComEd not being, or Salon not being at the table with this?
Yeah, so it's going to take a broad consensus to pass anything, as always. The Clean Jobs Coalition is a really broad coalition. It has amazing leadership on the environmental justice side, affordable housing, labor. So it's really pretty broad, and I'm hopeful that something will move forward. I can't actually answer your question. I don't know. I don't know when it'll go through, but I think with your leadership, with all of your leadership, getting folks engaged, empowered, active with their electeds. The more that you do your work, the more likely something like the Clean Energy Jobs Act is to pass in Illinois. So it all comes down to us all working together as a movement.
And I can also speak just pretty quickly at the local city level. There's also the Ready for 100 resolution that I think was passed earlier this year, and it contains things like transition to renewable energy, I think by 2050, the electrification of the bus fleet, and then there's another component that I'm missing. Yeah, but I know there are organizers that are working to build out the community engagement process so that it is something that is built not sort of top down, but with consensus and input from the Chicago community.
Great. So taking us back to the national stage, and we know there's a debate across the street happening now. What do you all think about the possibilities of winning a presidential election, flipping the Senate, holding on to the House, and how does the growing wave of interest in climate and interest in the Green New Deal support that or reinforce it?
I think that supporting and fighting for the Green New Deal is a fantastic opportunity for Democrats to win and sweep. The Republicans are extremely weak on the environmental issues. Donald Trump in particular, he comes out with these mealy-mouthed things every now and then. It's like, oh, we have the cleanest air, the cleanest water, because he knows that people want clean air and clean water, and the conservative movement and deregulation does not deliver that. So I think it's a very strong point politically speaking. And if you go all in on it, then you get the benefit of inspiring all the young people who are terrified of the future that they're going to have to live in with climate change and who want a vision of a better future. And you get a groundswell of grassroots support that can change the political landscape such that, the conventional wisdom on how tough it is going to be to retake the Senate maybe doesn't apply. If you boost voter turnout among people who don't turn out, like young people, then things change.
So for each of you, and then we're going to go to more questions from the audience, what are the two most important things that each of us should need to be doing in the coming months to fight climate change?
I'll
start? So for Sunrise Movement here in Chicago, I'm the fundraising team lead, so I'm always thinking about fundraising. But I would say that like one thing to do is like support movements and movement building. As I've like worked and gone to college, I've just sort of realized the power of movement building when you think about the civil rights movement and sort of how really radical change has like occurred in this country. It's been through like a broad base of movements and people like fighting for like basic rights. So I think one, supporting movements, there's like Sunrise Movement, there's Extinction Rebellion, there's like the US climate strike, all of these movements that are like trying to mobilize and bring people together to like make this issue sort of front and center in our like common sense as a country. I would also say if you like can't either join a movement or support a movement, like just donate or contribute, or just show up and like give your time and talk to other people about this. I'm surprised at how many people don't know what Sunrise is. And so I think something that we have to get better at is just speaking to more people, and like canvassing and talking about climate and talking about the Green New Deal.
I'd say get in where you fit in. There's this man named Howard Thurman. He was like one of the spiritual, I guess, mentors of Martin Luther King Jr., who was a problematic person, but I think maybe a little bit of history that's important. But Howard Thurman said, "Do not ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Right? So I'm sitting next to Isaac, who is a PhD. I don't even know how to pronounce what he studies, and he also sings, right, and writes songs, right. So what makes you come alive? The climate fight is so big that there's room, and I'm talking to a room full of indivisible people, so like you're already doing what what you're doing. But I think there's the climate fight is so huge that there is room for like what brings you joy, what you're passionate about, and what your expertise is to that fight. So of course my perspective is like the economic justice piece. We see the climate crisis as an outgrowth of like really flawed economic thinking, right? And the lack of solutions that are out there in public discourse as a result of bad economic thinking. So we start with that economics and justice conversation and have contributed significantly to the climate fight, right? So just ask what makes you come alive and add that to the fight, and I think we'll bring this thing out in the end.
So I should preface the thing that I'm going to recommend by explaining the reasons for it. So this is related to which presidential candidate to support. So I think when you're looking at the candidates in this primary, you should recognize we are facing an existential crisis, and the scale of mobilization required to stave off catastrophe is such that basically no level of ambition is too high. So you should be looking for candidates that are proposing the most ambitious plans to tackle climate change. And on top of that, you need to be able to trust that that candidate is going to prioritize tackling the climate crisis. Does that candidate have a record of talking about and fighting against climate change that goes back years? Does that candidate bring up climate change when it is not mentioned by the moderators? Does that candidate bring up climate change in their stump speeches? Then on top of that, you need to be able to think about, can that candidate build a movement that will counteract the political and financial power of the fossil fuel industry that's going to fight this with every ounce of their strength, because it is an existential threat to them. Where basically we can have a planet or we can have a fossil fuel industry, we can't have both. And so they are going to fight all the Green New Deal all the way. So which candidate has a track record of building a movement, is currently building a movement to basically completely change the political landscape and transform this country? And then finally, I would say foreign policy, also very important. Basically, the United States is the largest historical emitter, but we currently only 15% of global carbon emissions. Which candidate's climate plan has $200 billion committed to helping third world countries modernize and industrialize in low carbon ways? So the thing that I would say is support, donate to, and volunteer for Bernie Sanders.
Great. And I would just add to that, at the state and local level, talk to your elected officials. They tell me every day they so want to hear from you. So talk to them frequently, as much as possible, and tell them what you want. So we had a couple more questions. We had a lot of questions come in, so I'm trying to organize them. We had questions come in about reparations and indigenous people and land reform.
Yeah, I don't think there is a version of the Green New Deal that does not include honoring the treaties, right? So we got to put that on the table. And I would argue, and I think this is the conversation, a new consensus, we don't see the Green New Deal as reparations or reparations package as part of the Green New Deal, right? The Green New Deal is the floor upon which we will then have a reparations conversation. So it's like, oh, healthcare and like free college. It's like, okay, I could just move to the UK, okay, or Canada, right? Like that's not reparations, right? What I love is what Derek Hamilton says, great policy is not reparations, it's just good policy.
I can add a couple of things on the indigenous thing. First, we have to recognize that indigenous people live on sort of 5% of the remaining land mass on Earth, but that land mass is home to 85% of the world's biodiversity. So protecting indigenous treaties is good climate policy. And then the other thing I would say is, at least for me, as sort of like a white American, I'd always been sort of uncomfortable learning about our history of genocide of the Native Americans. But the thing about the Green New Deal is like it enables you to envision a world where you can like right past wrongs and bring have solidarity with the indigenous people who are here right now and build a better world together that it respects their rights and their land and that also protects the rest of the world. So the Green New Deal is a great It's a great vehicle for solidarity, even with groups that you don't have a lot of interaction with.
Great. So we got a couple of questions which are related. One is, so I'll try to put it together. One is, we have a climate emergency. Global warming is rising exponentially. What strategies do we currently know are capable of stemming that change? So I'll start with that one and then add a related one.
I'll just mention briefly, there was is anybody familiar with what happened with the repurchase market, like the overnight commercial paper market, like a couple weeks ago? So apparently, if you're a large company, you can like have somebody spot you some money, like big sums of cash for like 24 hours or 2 weeks for like 2% interest rate, right? And so when, I'm still wondering about what went down, but basically, as these transactions were happening, apparently more people needed to borrow short-term cash than capital was available. So the Federal Reserve had to step in and start lending to companies in 24-hour and 2-week increments, right? And this is in a fabulous, fantastic economy. What was interesting was that the Federal Reserve saw a crisis, right, with certain sets of people in our economy and took action. At New Consensus, we believe that the Federal Reserve is a unique opportunity to do all kinds of creative things that we do for banks each and every day that barely gets reported in the news, right? We literally had our Federal Reserve buy trillions of dollars in mortgages and take them off of the balance sheets of banks while they were kicking families out of those homes. And those mortgages are still on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. And those families have no home. In those municipalities, we're not collecting local taxes on those properties, right? You see that? So we think that we can be as creative and say, can the Federal Reserve guarantee investments in green technology? Can the Federal Reserve make it so that it is just so easy to invest in the stuff that we want and then increases the price and lowers the competitiveness of fossil fuels? So take away the subsidies and then use our, not just fiscal policy, but monetary policy levers as well. You don't have to be a wild left-leaning economist to know that the Federal Reserve can do a lot of stuff. I've asked a Nobel economist, he didn't tell me we couldn't do it, he just said we have to figure out how to get it done. So that's one thing we can do. We do it for business all the time.
Yep. Did you want to add? Okay. Nationally, we need to take action now. What kind of legislative and climate strike protest actions would you all suggest?
I'll add that I know there's the group Extinction Rebellion, which I think across the world is doing very interesting and like innovative and creative like ways of protesting. I think there was one where they were like throwing blood across a city hall building to say that like you're killing us. And so I think really finding ways to make activism inviting, like Isaac said, this is the first time that I've ever sort of participated in a protest, and it was something that was like very scary to me. I never challenged authority. I was the good child at my house. But I think it's been great to find fun ways, like through singing and chant and song, to like create community through direct action. And so.
And just to reiterate, there is a climate strike on December 6th, right?
December 6th.
So everyone should participate in that climate strike.
Great, thank you. Why aren't we talking about food? Per drawdown, more than 50% of emissions come from food.
I love talking about biological technology. So food is biological technology. Yes, agriculture is going to need to be transformed as well, and there are lots of really, really interesting ways to do that, both at the scale of sort of the organisms. You can grow things in polyculture formats that require less tilling and release less carbon from the soil. You can you can feed cows a particular type of algae. If you blend it into their food, they produce like 98% less methane. And so there are some really interesting technological solutions there. And then there's also the genetic engineering side, which I get very excited about. I'm a synthetic biologist. And you can like engineer microbes to fix nitrogen. The production of nitrogen fertilizer is responsible for something like 2% of global emissions. It's a massively energy intensive process. But microbes know how to do it just fine. Like that's how you get like soybeans that can, legumes. So you can actually engineer microbes to do that for all the plants, and then you don't need fertilizer. You can produce. So there's a lot of really cool ways to decarbonize agriculture and build regenerative agriculture.
Great, thank you. There's also a question about land use. Dejah, you talked about this a little bit, but that it's going to take hundreds of years for carbon in the oceans to balance again with carbon in the land and air.
Yeah, I guess I can try and answer the comment. It's true.
Yeah.
And there's a podcast that I was listening to recently by Ezra Klein, and there is Ayana Johnson. Yeah, she's a Black marine biologist. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was younger, and so I saw me and her, or the reverse. But she was talking about sort of the capacity of oceans to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And like water has a different specific heat capacity, like try. So Isaac let me know, to like absorb that carbon dioxide. And that's like causing things like ocean acidification, which are affecting coral reefs. But yeah, they're like the oceans are also warming, and yeah.
There was also a comment, more of a comment than a question, about how efficiency can have 30 times the impact of renewables, and that both are needed. It's not an either or. Do any of you have?
Yes, it's not an either or.
Yeah, I
Agree.
We all agree. Fantastic.
Is that the actual question?
Maybe somebody who raised it wanted to add more.
Well, actually, I raised it, and I'll tell you what the rest of it is, which is organizations like 350.org spend a lot of time on their website telling you about the importance of renewables and the importance of investment. But the use of efficiency, if it gets mentioned, it's a little throwaway line. And this is a big one. This is one that has probably kept, well, a great deal of CO2 from getting into the atmosphere over the last 40 years. And there's no discussion about land use. So you talked a little bit about regenerative farming, but this is really critical, dealing with the biology and hydrology of climate change, not just looking at the emissions of carbon, but really looking at the entire cycle. So how does this become more mainstream? Efficiency, land use, regenerative agriculture, aforestry, into the discussion?
And this goes back to, I think, Dejah's point about how everything intersects. right? So one, and so in our preliminary kind of investigation, it takes about 5 years for a farmer to transition to like the regenerative practices or so. We have a farm bill coming up, right? Where is it? Like, is it?
That's a piece of work.
Yeah, and so we have built into, so it's like the question of like corporate capture, right, of our democracy, like what enables a fossil industry to like capture our democracy is also what enables big ag and industrial ag to capture like parts of our democracy as well. Even the land grant institutions, these local universities, like state land grant universities that teach farmers agricultural practices, embedded in these instructional kind of programs are industrial ag, Monsanto, curricula. It's a lot to unpack. I think it comes down to people want better quality food, right? Imagine the cows that eat the algae and are also grazing, like moving about the land instead of like just grazing.
It's not algae, it's biochar.
Oh, biochar.
That will cut it down in a hurry.
Yeah. But I think it's like just talking about like first principles and values. Like we want better food, we want cleaner. It's a big issue. It's huge. I don't know how to mainstream it, but I think people have to know that what we have is completely a decision, right? And also farmers make more money if we move to this regenerative model, right? So what we're seeing is a hauling out of rural communities because a lot of that land, I mean, we have farmers farming land that are owned by real estate investment trusts. It's like a modern form of sharecropping, and we wonder why rural areas are slipping and turning to fascism, right? It's so you know where I bias. Like I kind of always come back to like this political economy thing. So yeah, I don't know how to popularize it, but I do know that that is how we can win the rural areas with the plan to say, listen, we're going to reinvest in farmers. You're going to own your land, right? And the subsidies aren't going to go to like 2 companies, right, that you're held hostage to. So, I mean, it's a great question. And you're right.
There's also a question about how the candidates should talk in defense of socialism necessary to achieve the Green New Deal.
Simple, bold statements of universal human political and economic rights. Everyone has the right to clean air, everyone has the right to clean water, everyone has the right to a livable future. This is how you win.
Can you share the and I think it's, can you talk about the technical issues related to carbon capture, I believe is the question, as it's related to the Use It Act?
What was the question? The technical aspects of
Carbon capture, yeah.
And in particular in the context of the Use It Act.
Yes.
So, carbon capture is potentially a very important thing. It's the idea of we got to take CO2 directly out of the atmosphere. In addition to not putting more of it in, we have to take some of it out and store it or put it into something useful. And the problem with carbon capture is sort of twofold. Number one is on the political side, promoting carbon capture is used as an excuse for not acting on like reducing fossil fuel production, fossil fuel emissions. So you just have to be sort of careful about that. Like carbon capture is going to be necessary in like particularly in the latter half of the century as we draw more carbon out of the atmosphere, get it out of the oceans. And then the other problem with it is, particularly in the concept of the Use It Act, it really matters what you use that carbon for. So the Use It Act proposes to promote the capture of carbon dioxide and then the pumping of it into the ground in order to push out more oil and more natural gas. And so that is obviously not how you do good carbon capture and sequestration. So the Use It Act is bad.
Should we mobilize against climate denial think tanks like the Heartland Institute here in Chicago?
Does the Heartland Institute have a presence? Like, what, can you refine the question?
It's on the Arlington Heights, so it's just in our backyard.
It's
and the Heartland
headquartered
Institute
here.
is the world's
I didn't even know that.
climate denial organization.
Yeah.
Funded by the Coke Industries, they denied the science on tobacco, they were funded by Big Tobacco, and even though their network is global, their headquarters is there in this little building that looks like a veterinary clinic in Arlington. I think we could take that over. Idea out there. In the universe, I'd love to make that happen.
I'll send a sign.
But I guess the bigger question is, do we just move beyond the denial in our political discourse as well as in our activism? Or do we need to meet them head on, and just like they do, on our positive message of attacking the messenger, if you can't attack the message, we've been trying to attack the message, but is it time to confront them with nonviolent civil disobedience?
Maybe it's a both and. Obviously I'm biased to the, like, we have better ideas, we actually have solutions that would work with the base that they actually are targeting, or at least the base of their elected officials that are in the pockets across the streets need to stay in office, right? We actually have better plans and better vision. So we're definitely, we have that high ground. I'm all for making their life difficult. Let's talk.
Then there's a whole set of questions about CEJA that sounded more like people wanted to have a conversation. Am I understanding that? Yeah. So I'll just throw them out there, and I think we'll make this more of a broader conversation. One was about which state electeds are taking leadership. There is a fact sheet if you go to the Illinois Clean Jobs Act Coalition, and it lists all that.
We passed it out to everyone.
Oh, everyone has it. Fantastic. So everyone has it. It seems like the number one thing we can do now is mobilize for the CEJA bill. Can we discuss this? There was also a question about the nuclear part of CEJA. Does anybody want to speak to that?
We've been real big supporters of CEJA for quite a while. Know a little bit about the Tabor's work, but it turns out we knew that there were like 4 other bills along with CEJA pending, but they were all industry bills, so we assumed Exelon stuff was in Exelon's bill. But now we've learned that actually they're not using the word subsidy because they know that everybody resents the fact that they got a huge subsidy in FEJA in 16. But there's language in CEJA that actually protects the nuclear industry, i.e. Exelon comment for decades to come. Now, I don't know where that section is. We follow all the articles that come out in Cranes, and we have followed Nuclear Energy Information Services information on this, so I feel like it's probably valid. So we really need to know that if that's in CEJA, the rest of the bill has marvelous features, but we don't want that to be slid into that bill and end up with supporting nuclear energy for decades to come.
So I have a follow-up question with that. So in light of Exelon's, how should we say it, legal troubles, right? My understanding is that they are, the coalition is moving beyond the utility. The utility is like, kind of like it's not really at the table anymore. So is that still the case? Is that stuff still in the bill?
It's still in.
And is the plan to keep it in? Is that, because I'm not at that table.
What we hear is that Pritzker is, and this is hearsay, I don't know, but that Pritzker is concerned about maybe not acting on CEJA until the investigations are resolved. And he also made a statement within the last 2 days about that something about the nuclear aspect is not resolved in his mind. So I think there's a great opening here for us to talk to all of my legislators from my
boost their own bottom line so that they can beat back renewable energy projects in the northern tier of Illinois. If there's any corporation that has fought renewable energy in the northern tier of Illinois more than Exelon, please let me know. Okay? So how can we get it in there that Exelon is just going to have to deal with the market as is, okay? And that would mean that they would definitely slowly, because right now wind comes online for 4 cents a kilowatt hour, and nuclear is what, 3 or 4 times that. So talk to us about what's going on in the climate table around this issue.
Yeah. They're not talking about it.
Yeah, we don't get their notes.
Yeah, the climate table is really not very transparent right now, so, these are things we just need to face, because now's our opportunity to raise our voice in many different directions and let our legislators know that we're concerned, we think there's a big problem here, and we love CEJA otherwise, we want all the other features, but let's not be fooled.
And in the northern tier, we want wind and solar too. We don't want to be, have this nuclear extortion around our neck.
I think I can speak to the capacity market. I work for Faith in Place, and we're one of the organizations in the coalition. So I obviously can't prove the nuclear thing. Yes, how I understand it, I'm very new, so bear with this explanation, is that there's energy demands throughout the year. So in the transition to 100% carbon-free power, it's building off nuclear because that's the core supply, which is also why Illinois right now is ranked rather low in carbon emissions nationally, because so much of our power is nuclear. So that the transition to renewables is building off that and replacing fossil fuels versus replacing all of it because of the fluctuation during the winter months and when there's not enough solar.
The capacity market, I'm so sorry.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, the capacity market is actually more about the baseline energy that we need every day.
right, so I was gonna speak to that, the advantage, just the flip side, which I understand what you're saying, the flip side being the advantage of having a state, controlled capacity market is Trump just appointed someone to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they want to incentivize fossil fuels, and if on a federal level, they pass that before CEJA would be passed, then the state, we would have to pass new legislation to be able to control the capacity market. And if they're able to incentivize fossil fuels, that will make our renewable market actually less, they won't win in the capacity market bidding because they won't have the subsidies to make it more affordable.
So I'm just gonna make a recommendation. There's like a lot of technical stuff being talked about right now that I'm guessing not everybody in the room is totally following. I'm also hearing that you all want to have a discussion about the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which was actually not today's agenda, and I don't think anybody up here is representing the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, as much as we, all are working actively on climate change that we are doing, and that's what we have expertise to talk about tonight. So if we can kind of focus on the panel and these amazing leaders that we have up here tonight, and focus on Green New Deal and whatever you all want to talk about, and then if you want to have a more technical conversation about what's in or not, what's in the Clean Energy Jobs Act or not, you actually bring the experts to the table who can answer those questions.
I just have one quick thing. I just wanted to say, yesterday there was a 30-minute webinar published on the Illinois Clean Jobs YouTube and on their website. So if you're really interested in it's a little bit dense, but in 30 minutes you can understand a very complicated bill a little bit easier. So in case you're interested.
Yeah. being told that it's time to wrap it up and that we have a special gift tonight, and that is the gift of song. So we're going to ask Isaac.
No, Damon, you have to sit.
I was just gonna sit with.
I see. Be part of the movement.
Yes, sir.
There are song sheets right by my chair there. Would a couple of people please hand them out? I think you'll find this fun. It's been a long time since I've been at a political meeting. It ended with a political song. It's time we start singing together. Couple of things while we're getting ready. While the song sheets are being distributed, I want to mention. Indivisible Illinois 9 is having a second annual Happy Blue Year celebration on January 13th to kick off a year of hard work. It'll be the evening of January 13th. Mark it on your calendars now at the Black Ensemble Theater on North Clark Street, just north of by Clark and Sunnyside. Also, I was going to reintroduce you to the panel that's now missing, just because some people came in late and didn't get to meet them when we all started. That was Ann Evans from Elevate Energy who was moderating. Dejah Powell from Sunrise Movement on the south side. Damon Drummer from New Consensus. And Isaac Larkin from Northwestern University. Do you all have song sheets? Yes? Okay. You want to explain what this song is all about?
Yes.
Can everybody hear me okay without the mic? Yeah. All right. So this song is an adaptation of a Billy Bragg classic called There Is Power in a Union. And I really believe that, and I think we need a lot of union power. We're going to need a lot of union power to get a Green New Deal and get to a good future. But when I look at all the young people striking, sitting in at Nancy Pelosi's office and holding their politicians accountable, pushing the conversation on climate to actions the scale required by the crisis, a lot of them aren't in unions yet, but they are wielding power. So this adaptation is for them. So what we're going to try to do, I'm going to have you guys sing the chorus with me. So I'm going to teach you the chorus, and then we're going to sing the whole song, and you guys will sing the chorus with me. All right, sound good? This is how the chorus goes. The movement forever like sun shining bright. Down with injustice, all people unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in a movement. All right? So we're gonna do it 2 lines at a time. And we're all gonna sing it together. All right, are you guys ready? So I'm gonna sing 2 lines, and you sing them right back to me. We'll practice that way. All right, sound good? The movement forever like sun shining bright. The movement forever like sun shining bright. Down with emissions, all people unite. Down with emissions, all people unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in a movement. There is power in a movement. Fantastic. All right, let's sing it all together one time, and then we'll do the whole song. All right, sound good? All right, 1, 2, 3. The movement forever like sun shining bright. Down with injustice, all people unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in a movement. All right, excellent. Okay, now each chorus is a little bit different, so just read the song sheet. Let's do this thing, people. There is power in the sunlight, the wind and the land. Power in the hands of people, but it all say enough, sir. You guys ready? The movement forever, like sun shining bright. Down with injustice, all people unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in a movement. How I long for the morning that they realize brutality and oil state bills cannot defeat us. But who'll defend the people who cannot organize when the oligarchs send lackeys out to cheat us? Money speaks for money, the devil for his own. Who comes to speak up for our only home? What a comfort to the hopeless, a light to the child. There is power in a movement. The movement forever, like sunshine bright. Down with emissions, all people unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in a movement. All right, let's bring it home. The movement forever, like sunshine bright. Let's build a new world, all people unite. With our brothers and our sisters, together we will stand.